Hello and welcome to Crucible of Words for yet more dedicated legacy action. We've got our hands on some new cards in the form of Atraxa Grand Unifier, so we're going to be playing a blue-black Reanimator deck to really try and make use of this new card. So, as you can imagine, what this deck is trying to do is reanimate Atraxa, or a Griselbrand or an Archon of Cruelty. So we've got a selection of things we can reanimate. We do have Grief if that's the thing we want to do. Now, with the other cards we have to do this with is we have some Animate Deads and Dance of the Deads. Dance of the Dead you don't see very often because the creature doesn't untap anymore. But if you're putting that on, let's say, a creature with Vigilance, that's probably going to be pretty good, right? It's better than Animate Dead on a Atraxa. But more importantly, because it's an enchantment, it means our Atraxa can find it when it comes into play. If you're not familiar with this card, for each card type, when it comes into play, you reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each card type, you may put one card of that type into your hand. So you can put in a land, you can put in an artifact, a sorcery, an enchantment, an instant, a creature. You can basically draw a whole bunch of cards, and this deck really maximizes what you can get off of that. Now, the usual Reanimator deck in Legacy is red-black, and obviously we're not doing that. We're doing blue-black. So why are we doing this combination? So we get Careful Study instead of Faithless Looting. That's, you know, relatively fine as a trade-off. We don't get the flashback, but that's not that often. That's usually like when things start going wrong for Reanimator. But we have some tools to stop things going wrong for us. So we have Brainstorm to fix our draws. Now this is one of the problems that Reanimator deck struggles with a lot, is the fact that you're trying to, if they hit your initial thing, how are you going to rebuild? And you're kind of just living off the top. Brainstorm can really help us out there. We've got a few Dazes, because some protection would be nice for what we're trying to do. We've got these 4 Force of Wills. Now, we don't have a huge number of blue cards. We've got 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, which is about the amount you want for a Force of Will, right? But that's because Atraxa, our big win condition, is a blue card for Force of Will. It's also a black card for Grief, so it kind of just does everything here. We've also got Entomb, so we can go and find our one-of Griselbrand or any of our other things, and Reanimate, Thoughtleize. So we've got no Dark Ritual, but we can use Lotus Petal to ramp out. So we're going to be probably a touch slower than the red-black decks, but we've got a lot better protection suite, I think, here. So why is Atraxa so good is a question that people might be asking. Why is this better than Griselbrand? So if you reanimate Griselbrand and then pay 7 life, then your life total is relatively low, and those 7 cards have to be pretty good to get you there. Now, if you reanimate Atraxa, it's going to draw you all those cards without having to pay life, which is pretty useful. Also, it's got a really nice bevy of text on it. Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink. So this can beat 8/8 Murktide Regents. Wow. It can trade with them and gain you a bunch of life, which is, you know, pretty close to beating them, because if it's already come into play, it's doing some work. The fact that it's Vigilance means against things like the Initiative, you can attack and block, whereas sometimes with regular Reanimator, you end up in a horrible situation where your Griselbrand isn't good enough. So this kind of does it all. And I've been very impressed seeing it on people's videos as well as on the other side of the battlefield against me. Now let's have a little talk about the sideboard. Because we're blue, it means we get a reliable show and tell we can cast. Show and tell. If you're going to show and tell one of these creatures in, Atraxa is the best of the bunch, because this is going to give you a reload, and you don't have to worry about something like a shoulder on the other side of the battlefield, or whatever, or any sort of removal effect, because you're going to get the trigger straight away. So if they've got like a Touch the Spirit Realm or something that can come in, you don't have to pay a whole bunch of life and then leave yourself in an awkward situation, that sort of thing. So the show and tell should be better with Atraxa as well. We have 1 Chancellor with the Annex. This is so that we can Entomb for it, and then bring this in against things like Storm decks, which is what our Flusterstorm is for, as well as also protecting our combo. We've got Coffin Purge. This is just a piece of Graveyard Hate that we can find within Entomb, so it kind of gives more flexibility to one of the best cards in our deck. We have a Brazen Borrower. Pretty standard in a lot of Legacy decks these days, just to try and bounce problem permanents. There's a few of those going around, so we've got that. Faerie Macabre, an uncounterable way of removing cards from a graveyard that, well, it can be stifled, but most of the decks that we're trying to bring in against don't care about stifle. It can be used on turn 0 through a Chancellor with the Annex. That's why we're using this one. We've got another Thoughtseize just to add to our suite. Sometimes it's going to be useful. We've got 3 Shriekmaws, which I have to assume is for the Initiative from this list that was handed to me. I think this is going to be quite a useful one. We get to kill stuff and then bring them back and kill more stuff and just kind of keep the chain going. So this is going to be pretty decent against anything where we want to kill their creatures. The last thing, which is quite interesting here, is Filigree Sylex. This is just Ratchet Bomb with an extra line of text, which is fine. We're using a new card. I think on my list, I did a recent video of the 10 cards I think are most likely to see Legacy play from the new set, and this is one of the highest ones on there, purely because it's a slightly better version of a card that already sees play. Bit of a boring one, but it's a new card, so we'll roll with it. And that's it for the deck. We're hoping to make some pretty scary patterns of play with Atraxa, which then finds you the next guy to go in, or just finds enough protection that this can close the game out. We don't really have any removal outside of the Archon, so some problem permanents could get in our way in the main deck, perhaps. Things like Ensnaring Bridge off of like a Khan package might be a problem, but hopefully the Force of Wills and Dazes can cover us on that front. Alright, we're about ready to jump into a league, but first off, it's time for a plug. Like, comment, subscribe. These things cost you nothing and really help my channel out. Especially subscribers, that's what I sort of need to hit my next milestone. So if you could do that, that would be wonderful. Alright, let's jump into a Legacy League with the Grand Unified Theory of Reanimator. Round 1, we're on the play, which is a good place to be, but not with this hand. This doesn't present a creature that we can do anything with, so we should mulligan this. This has a lot of the things that we want, so we're going to keep this. What is going to be the hardest thing to force through here is the question. I think we want to keep the Brainstorm in case our opponent wastelands us. This is actually a really tricky one to throw back. We kind of would like to clear the way, so I guess we're probably binning off the Animate Dead here. Because if we can operate on 1 mana here, so we can play out our Underground Sea, and rather than Thoughtseize here, I think we're probably better off brainstorming or entombing. Now it depends what our opponent does. The one way this gets punished is Chalice of the Void. But if we have to emergency brainstorm, that's a thing that we can actually do. Okay, Mishra's Bauble. We're going to see the top card of our library, which may give them lots of information or may misdirect them, depending on what they see. A Wasteland. Okay. So this is why we did this play, so we have the Brainstorm. So they saw a Griselbrand. Interesting. So 2 of these are going back. Probably the Griselbrand and the Brainstorm, which we're going to draw anyway. So we have a choice here. We can... So these 2 cards then suggest Delver, so I think we're actually going to Thoughtseize our opponent here. Try to punch a hole in what our opponent's doing. A Minor Misstep is pretty good here, as is the Daze. These are both going to be quite challenging to play around. I think we take the Daze because that's the free one. So let's keep our opponent's hand revealed. Happy to not see another Wasteland in our opponent's hand there. There's a Flooded Strand. So they're going to pass holding up Minor Misstep, and we're not going to play into it. We're just going to pass the turn here. So our opponent basically wasted that whole turn. They could have deployed a Delver. Obviously, that means we get to do stuff. A Delver of Secrets, sure. So we're going to Brainstorm in a turn. This is to bait the Minor Misstep here. We don't actually need this Brainstorm to resolve. It'd be nice, but if we get the Misstep out of our hand, out of the opponent's hand, that works quite well for us. We can draw a land. We drew a Lotus Petal, kind of like a land. Opponent's got 4 cards. They played the Volcanic Island this turn. No, we know their hand, right? So we will Entomb. I know. Yeah, so we've seen the Delver's the one that we didn't know yet. So the Force of Will came out here. That's fine because we get to do the same play next turn. What do they pitch? Exile a Brazen Borrower. Okay, I'm not keeping very good track of the cards in their hand, am I? Ponder. We could take this opportunity now to cast the Entomb. Now we know our opponent can't deal with... It's very unlikely to have a counterspell here. Let's fire this one off. So let's put an Atraxa in the graveyard. Feels like the best one. Mystic Sanctuary tapped. Okay. So got this Expressive Iteration in their hand. Let's give it a go. No pain costs. Okay, so they're trying to Brainstorm. If our Reanimate resolves, we almost certainly win the game, I would say. Yeah, okay. They know how powerful this card is going to be in play, so we get the win against Delver. Alright. Against Delver, what would I like to have here? Removing their graveyard is a thing you can do, but I'm not that into it. I think the Shriekmaws are actually kind of neat here. It is 2 mana removal spells, but it can certainly mess with what our opponent's doing. The Daze on the play is pretty good. I don't think we need Show and Tells. I don't mind Thoughtseize either. There's a lot of tricky options of what the best thing to do here is, to be honest. Do I want these things? Do I want this Brazen Borrower? Do I want this Flusterstorm? Flusterstorm feels like a good one to force things through with. We don't really need Force of Will so much. We're not trying to super combo. We're not trying to stop their super combos. Also, maybe the Thoughtseize, we just don't want the life loss, and we could just have a couple more blue cards. And then we have a choice of whether or not we want these Shriekmaws in, because they do answer a lot of our opponent's things if we have to get scrappy. Which is a thing that might happen. Tricky. So our blue spells are going to be worse because of Pyroblast. Which is another reason I'm not so hot on Force of Will here. Maybe we'll just try something a bit weird today and try these Shriekmaws. I love Shriekmaw just as a card. So it's probably going to go downfall here. So you can try some Shriekmaws. It kills all of the threats in Delver. And it sort of dodges a lot of the Pyroblast and other stuff that our opponent's doing. Okay, we can keep this one. So what we're going to do is we're going to cast this Entomb in our opponent's upkeep. Or if they crack this fetch at any point. Okay, maybe we're not doing that. Maybe we're just going to attempt it now, I suppose. So we're probably just going to get a swamp here for purposes of Wasteland. Now the tricky thing is our opponent can have Force of Negation, which means casting the Entomb is better next turn. But if we get to Reanimate here, our opponent's definitely going to have kept something here. I'm going to respect my opponent and play in their upkeep here. Sure. So we're playing around Daze and Force of Negation here. But they could have the Misstep. Something we're going to have to work through, but... Right, Polluted Delta from our opponent, another Volcanic Island, and a Dragon's Rage Channeler. Another Polluted Delta for us. I guess this is the one we play out. And we see where we go. The other option we have is to draw up until we discard, which I don't think is a particularly strong option. But we might be doing that from now on, because we've got 3 mana in play. But this might kill us before then. Okay, our opponent's just got reactive cards in hand. So let's see what we draw. Oh no, they got... Yeah, so they didn't have any, like, cantrips or anything, is what I mean there. This is a lot of creatures. We're not going to have time to draw up and discard. Let's get ourselves a basic island here. Cast a Careful Study. This is a good one for them to mess around with. Okay, so we can get rid of this Atraxa and probably a bonus land. Play this one out. We will go with the Animate Dead the Reanimate first, because if this gets countered and we get to Animate Dead, then that's probably better for us. And it just gives us more mana to work with. Surgical Extraction. Yep, it's a pretty powerful one. Our opponent's got 1 card in hand. So we could cast the Careful Study now to play around Pyroblast. But obviously we don't want to discard too many things. We're going to end up with 2 cards in hand here. Okay, an Archon of Cruelty is a pretty good one. I think we're just going to bin off the Flooded Strand as well. So we have 2 bites at the cherry next turn in case they draw a counterspell. If we can resolve either of these Animate Deads, we probably win the game. Not necessarily, but probably. We also get a bit of information about our opponent's draw here. Only 1 Delver is flipping. Expressive Iteration. In terms of cast of Find, that's a pretty good one. It's going to give them a lot of potential to dig into their deck. But we can play an Animate Dead around a Daze, and then we can play a second Animate Dead if the first one gets countered somehow. So I think we're in an okay spot, potentially. Brainstorm. Okay, it's getting worse. Let's see if they surveil this on top or bottom. Okay, so they put 1 Delver Secrets into the bin off the surveil. So we're going to take 7 this turn, but we're going to get ourselves an Archon of Cruelty, which will wipe one of the guys, draw us a card. And if our opponent doesn't have an answer, it will rip apart their hand. So it should also be pointed out that Exhume is really bad at the moment, which is another reason why Animate Dead, Dance of Dead is good. Because the problem with Exhume is you have all these like white initiative decks and solitudes and things. So it's just not a feasible... Ooh, interesting. What are they doing with this? Surgical Extraction. Okay, does that mean they have a Brainstorm here? Alright, we will go for this Archon of Cruelty, I suppose. They did have a Brainstorm. Okay. So this is pretty bad for us. I imagine the Delver's going to flip as well. So this is the Surgical Extraction they've got back. So what we have to do now is cast this Shriekmaw so that we can live for a turn and then probably animate it back again. We have one Griselbrand left in our deck, so that's why these Shriekmaws are going to be useful. Sad times. They've got Daze as well. They do. Okay, they've got it all. If we draw an Entomb next turn, then we might be okay. But we're going to take 9 this turn because they've Brainstormed, so they should have been able to set up the Delver this turn. There's Brainstorm as well. This is just a classic case of just getting Delvered, really. So, smash us for this. Do they have a Lightning Bolt as well? Floating around in top cards of their library. Let's find out. They put 1 card on top of their library, so there it is. Okay, that was pretty grim for us there. So, how do we want to handle this? We can board in Faerie Macabres if we want to play around Surgical Extraction so we can take out the thing that they try and extract. Obviously that just sets our plan back a fair chunk. So I'm not really convinced about that one. I think we just need to submit as is, unless you want to board in these Show and Tells as the other option. Maybe these Show and Tells, just giving us more hits from what we're trying to do. It does play into Pyroblast as the only issue. But we have Dazes on the play, and we have this Flusterstorm. Maybe we're not looking to grief our opponent necessarily. But again, these are creatures that we can play when things start going wrong. But maybe we should just plan for success. I'll take out 1 Animate Dead, 1 Reanimate, I think. I guess the Animate Dead is better than the Dance of the Dead most of the time, depending on what we've got here. This is probably okay. Alright, we'll give this a go. We have no lands. Alright, we can keep this one. I don't think we need 2 Shriekmaws here. I think we'll say done on this. I think we're supposed to... This can only get us an island. I think we have to play a basic island here. So I think we're going to go Careful Study and see how this pans out for us. This is an interesting one. I guess we're not going to need 2 Entombs here. We've already got one of our creatures. We will need to find a way of reanimating our creature. We could have played out the Lotus Petal here, actually. Maybe that would have been useful just in case we get up in a spot where we have to use one of our abilities. One of our spells. Right, a Ponder on turn 1 is pretty good news for us. This means we're not facing down a threat, so we've got time. And I guess a Wasteland not so bad. They might have had a Wasteland, but they can't play it there anyway. So we'll play this out first in case our opponent has a Daze. We'll cast this Brainstorm. Okay. This is some stuff, isn't it? I guess we put back a Brainstorm and a Brainstorm. No, we can't really put back 2 Brainstorms here. Maybe it's this Shriekmaw. Shriekmaw, then Brainstorm. So we can Entomb to try and shuffle things away. Or we can try and Reanimate here. I'm not really convinced our Reanimate's going to resolve. We can wait till next turn and try and resolve it around a Daze. I think that's probably preferable. They did shuffle off their Ponder, but I think we should be at least trying to play around a Daze here. If Atraxa gets into play, it gets into play. Sure, so they've got a threat. They have the Misstep spell available as well here. I think we have to work through it. Force of Will, pitching Ponder. Understood. Then we'll cast a Brainstorm here. We're going to be casting a spell anyway. Interesting. Interesting indeed. I think we put this on top. And then the Animate Dead. Or the Shriekmaw. Probably the Shriekmaw here. Alright, let's try and force back here. I'm expecting us to get hit by a Daze here. A Pyroblast, sure. Now, we have an Animate Dead for next turn. And we've expunged a certain amount of our opponent's resources. We're not going to play this because this way we get to play around Wasteland by not just leaving it out there and letting them just Wasteland us off of 2 mana. So we have to beat a Daze next turn. Another Dragon's Rage Channeler. That's a pretty strong one. Fetch hand. So they've got 2 cards in hand. So they're representing potentially Force of Will. I think if they had a Ponder, they'd probably cast it there. Could be a Daze. We don't really have the luxury of playing around that, I'm afraid. Cast this targeting Atraxa. Black and blue. Getting dazed here. Yes, we are getting dazed. Sure. So our opponent kind of had everything here. They had the threats. They had 3 pieces of interaction. It's a tough one for us here. I would always prefer to be on the Delver side of this matchup than the Reanimator side, because the Delver just has so many tools for this sort of matchup. Alright, so we know there's a Brainstorm on top of our library. We probably just have to fire off the Shriekmaw though. Okay, we have to fire off the Brainstorm. Sure, we're just getting absolutely clapped by this deck. So our opponent's deck is easily the best deck in the format. So it's no shame getting beaten by it. Oh no, it's the Entomb, isn't it? We had to pitch the Brainstorm, didn't we? So our opponent hits us for 6 on the next turn. And we have to find a black source to even survive the following turn. So I would say that we are about 95% dead here. And the Delver, so even if we get the land for the Shriekmaw, their Delver could flip and kill us anyway. So things are very bad. Alright, we are just done here. Yeah, we got absolutely Delvered right in our hearts there. Nothing much we could do about that one. I don't hate the way we sideboarded there. Maybe the Shriekmaws are wrong and we should just be having like some duresses, like Thoughtseizes and stuff. Maybe that's the plan. Alright, let's go on to the second round. We don't have any mana again, so we're going to be mulliganing. Okay, so we have Careful Study, Reanimate. So we can make a turn 1 big scary guy if we want. We don't really get to keep the Force of Will if we do this though. But we do get 2 bites of the cherry, potentially with the Animate Dead later on. Ancient Tomb. This is going to be a Chalice. That's going to be pretty bad for us. Whew. Okay, it wasn't a Chalice. Shadow Spear, Haywire Might. Interesting. 4 cards left in our opponent's hand. Feels like our opponent has the potential to do some sort of shenanigans here. Because they kept thinking about it for quite a long time. Let's get ourselves an Underground Sea. Let's start with a good old-fashioned Careful Study. So we can bin off these 2. And then we can grief our opponent, pitching this Thoughtseize. Emery. Okay. So now we can reanimate our Archon of Cruelty here. Kill off the Haywire Might, take one of the cards out of their hand, and we draw a card. So I imagine it's probably... Yep, it's the Ancient Tomb. They do gain 2 life for that guy dying. And we can Animate Dead back another one if we draw a land next turn. That's going to be a pretty bad time for our opponent. They need a Petal this turn so they can cast the Otawara. A Mox doesn't do it. Well, they've played the Otawara out. Right, so they're maybe looking to hit the Ether Spell Bomb. I think our opponent is in trouble. I'd like to get some more information about our opponent's deck, if they're regular 8 cast or if they're the Painter 8 cast build. So this goes to attack. They lose their guy. Let's just make sure we present 2 lethal threats. Here's the thing with Reanimated decks. When it goes well, it goes really well. So we've got Force of Will backing up our 2 Archon of Cruelties. Okay. So we don't know what sort of deck our opponent is in terms of their Painter or regular 8 cast. So the old Filigree Sylex is probably going to have some use here. Flusterstorm possibly, but there's a very real chance to run Chalice. So Show and Tell needs to come in so we can do our things without having to worry about having 1-drops resolve. These are probably trimming on some of our 1-drops somewhere along the lines. But quite which ones I haven't worked out just yet. Brazen Borrower is something I wouldn't mind as an option to take out some of their bits and pieces. Flusterstorm does work underneath the Chalice because the copies still happen. It's just the original copy that gets counted. So the Griefs are definitely better than Thoughtseizes. So I guess we're probably cutting Thoughtseizes. And because we've got these Show and Tells, we can trim a little bit on some of these 1-drops. Probably trim on a Reanimate. And probably an Entomb, because the Careful Study will help us better if things are going badly for us. I think we probably still need the Force of Wills. I'm not that convinced by Daze here, so we'll drop a couple of Daze. Our opponent seems to have quite a lot of mana when they go. Maybe we don't need any Daze at all, and we're supposed to have some... just more of these sorts of things. Maybe a Flusterstorm is better than Daze here. And that gives us one more shout. Maybe we can just keep the Entomb in. Entomb can be pretty bad. I think we'll keep a Thoughtseize in. Thoughtseize can be an enabler for us as well as disruption. Alright, so our hand here is very sketchy. Now we could try and keep this, but if our petal or our careful study gets hit, we're in trouble. We do get to grief our opponent first, and we have 2 cantrips. This is one of those ones where we could really get punished here. If our opponent's got a chalice as well, this is going to go pretty poorly for us. I think we'll mulligan. Okay, this is better. So we have the 3 mana to cast the thing we need. I think we're going to put back the swamp though. If we need to hard cast a grief, that's the only thing we can do. We can also use this to peer our opponent's hand the turn we try and show and tell. We have a careful study to find us some bits and pieces as well. So we're not in an amazing spot, but we're fine. We can careful study into Brainstorm fetch. Okay, so they got turn 1 Emery. This could go either way for us. Let's see. Painter 7. Okay, so they are on the 8 cast build, which is, in my opinion, the far superior. This is going to name Griselbrand, which is funny because that's not really a card that's a big part of our game plan. It might name like a fetch land and just try and guess. They did name a fetch land. I see. The Dark Arts, as they call it. All right. Let's careful study. Force of Will, Lotus Petal. One of these are really filling me with a huge amount of joy. We'll get rid of this Polluted Delta because it doesn't do anything right now. I think we have to keep the Lotus Petal because we're going to need some mana. Then are we looking at Force of Willing, or are we looking at... I think it's probably the Force of Will here. Our plan is just to grief, pitching, reanimate, and then pop our opponent that way. Do we play out a Lotus Petal now in case we need to emergency Brainstorm? Or is our Lotus Petal going to get blown up by something like a Haywire Mite? I think we're supposed to keep our Petal in hand. So the Painter build doesn't have chalices. So for game 3, we can make sure we have all of our Thoughtseize and things. I think our opponent is new to deck because they targeted their Seat of the Synod, but it's only spells you can target. Another show and tell. Let's cast a Brainstorm. So we could just grief our opponent. Doesn't seem the worst strategy. We don't need 2 show and tells. We probably do still need our Lotus Petal though. So we'll keep a show and tell and a Lotus Petal. We're going to take this Marsh Flats. We need a grief for our little plan now, and we need a black card for grief, and we need the reanimate for this plan to work. So it doesn't really matter which card goes back here. I think it would just be the grief can just go away. And then we are evoking this, pitching the Animate Dead. What was our opponent working with over there? 2 Force of Negations and a Thought Monitor. Bit tricky. So if we take this Force of Negation, we can crack this for Underground Sea. We can reanimate, targeting our grief. And this will either get a 2 for 1. Well, it's going to be good for us either way. We either get to see their hand again and take another piece, or they burn their entire hand to do that. Sure. I think we will now play out this Lotus Petal. So our plan now is to draw an Atraxa or something cool like that. Our opponent doesn't have anything too scary in there. They have a Painter, but they don't have any draw engines. They're just going for Lotus Petal here. Okay, so we've got Painter's Servant. And in blue. That's over to us. An Entomb. That's an awkward one. We don't really want to entomb anything. So I think we just have to pass here. Because we're kind of trying to draw it. So we don't want to take one of our big creatures out of our deck. But if we draw any of our reanimation spells, we can then draw it. Okay, so our opponent is probably just on the beatdown plan here for... Probably attack us for 1 and play another Painter. And then next turn, they'll attack us for 3. So it's not a very fast clock, but obviously if they find a Grindstone, we just lose the game. So let's hope that doesn't happen. Okay, so everything is red and blue. Cool. Gold cards for everyone. Okay, so now we can just go Entomb. We can go and get this Atraxa. We can reanimate Atraxa. And okay, so we get a creature. So we want the Force of Will. So we want our instant, our sorcery, it's probably this one, our artifact, and our creature. So probably the Archon. And then we can just Archon of Cruelty the next turn. That gets their creatures out of play. That's one of every type. So let's say done. We'll play out our Lotus Petal here. All of our cards are blue, so pitching to Force of Will. not going to be that difficult. Now, the one problem we have is if they drew the Grindstone there, we counter it and they replay it with the Emery. That would have been real bad for us. I can't really attack because Atraxa is a big scary creature. So it's over to us. Our opponent doesn't have any cards in hand. We're in a relatively commanding position here. Interesting. So we can show and tell when our opponent has an empty hand. That feels like a good place to be. We go blue, blue, white. Let's do this. Put this in. And we go to attacks. Just going to attack. Our Polluted Delta doesn't do anything here. I'm debating firing off this Careful Study in case we can get... no, because we're going to end up with not enough cards to do everything. And unless we... Is there something we can draw here? How do we sideboard? Let's just have a little check. So the Faerie Macabres and the Coffin Purge. We don't have any of those. We don't have any graveyard interaction. We do have the Flusterstorm, which isn't going to do anything. I think we just pass the turn here. If our opponent doesn't have anything, they lose. If they have Grindstone, we lose. Okay, they didn't have the Grindstone, so we got there. Our opponent was clearly a bit new with their deck. They missed an Emery play at one point. They targeted the wrong thing. Could have been a misclick, to be fair. But I feel their hand didn't... I wouldn't have kept their hand against a Reanimator deck personally. I would have gone in... Actually, no, I suppose this one they had all the Force of Negations, actually. So that was probably fine. We just kind of blundered our way through it with all this discard and playing a little bit slower. Alright, let's go on to the third round. Alright, our hand's got a lot of protection for it. We can put a big creature in the bin, we just need to find the answer. I think this is fine. We'll keep this. Wasteland is going to be our enemy, but that's happened more than once. So let's go for the... I think we do go for the Careful Study, just in case we get Wasteland or something. I'd like to be able to play this game next turn. So we don't have an answer yet. Oh, we don't have a way of bringing our guy back, but so we're going to need this Brainstorm. Are we going to need this Entomb? I don't think so. I think I'd rather have the Thoughtseize and all the protection here. If we can find a way of killing stuff. A grief. This is a real awkward one for us. Because we counterspell this, then our opponent can just Daze it. I think we're on a mirror here. I think we have to let it ride. Feels awful, but... Okay, so I took the Daze, so we have to use our Brainstorm. Because they're going to be reanimating our Atraxa. So we basically have to Force of Will this, otherwise we lose the game. Now, if they got Force of Will back, then we lose. Yep, Daze does it. I think we can concede there. Sure. Turn one win. Bit awkward. So they kind of were doing the same thing as us, but they did a better job of it, really. So it's Coffin Purges and these Faerie Macabres seem decent. Chancellor can be okay. We definitely don't want Show and Tell. That's just a disaster. Thoughtseize has potential too. What of our stuff is going to be awkward here? 2 for 1 in ourselves. It might be weirdly difficult in this matchup. How do we puzzle our way through this one? I think because we're on the play, we have to be the aggro. Now, what exactly that means in terms of our sideboarding. So the Dazes are going to be good on the play. We kind of want all of our stuff so we can just kind of jam on turn 1 with like Force of Will up. So maybe the Thoughtseizes are for the next game. We do have to worry about our opponent's versions of this as well. So we do need the Thoughtseize because we can't Force of Will those. This is really hard to sideboard with. Trying to work out what actually gets cut here. I don't really like the Griefs too much because our opponent could just reanimate them. We can find 3 more spots. I think we have to have our protection in just so we can land the first thing and then just stop our opponent from ever doing anything. And maybe we trim on some of the more expensive reanimate type effects. Or maybe maybe the game's not going to go long enough for Brainstorm to matter. That's a crazy thing to say, but maybe that's the case. We basically have to wrap this game up with our opening hand, so I think we need to go faster here. Okay, so we can keep this. We have 2 creatures to bin off. The Atraxa's the better of the 2 creatures. I think we're just putting the Archon of Cruelty away. Saying done. So we're not going to Careful Study now because we know our opponent is not playing a Wasteland deck. We're just going to try and attack their hand and hold up a Daze and see if we can get there. They boarded in show and tell. That's wild to me. Now, their hand is... Yeah, their hand is something, that's for sure. I guess we take the... Oh, is it the Daze? Probably a Daze. Yikes. Alright, this is going to be real tricky. Okay, so there's a Careful Study and the Polluted Delta we know about. I don't think we want to get into a battle trying to Daze this. They binned off a show and tell as well. So it's our turn to cast a Careful Study. Because our opponent's got these show and tells in their deck, I don't really want to get rid of our Archon of Cruelty, both of our threats from our hand. But they've already binned off their show and tell. So I reckon we're supposed to just get rid of both of our guys here. Play this out. And let's hope for the best, I think. We have Force of Will or Daze this turn. So we are going to lose this game. Our opponent's hand is just better than ours. Force of Will pitching. Yeah, so they're going to go and get the Atraxa. I don't think we can beat that. I think we just concede. Sure, so that's what happens sometimes in the mirror match. In a mirror match like this, it's basically who has the better opening hand for the most part, because this isn't a game about sculpting over a long amount of turns. It's about doing your thing and who's got the best way of doing their thing or the best way of stopping the opponent doing the thing. And they had all the permission in the world, and they Careful Studied right into their combo. So, yeah, can't be upset about losing the mirror like that, I suppose. Let's go on to the next round. So we've got some protection. We've got a Careful Study that can find us what we need to do. And we can keep this. Then Thoughtseize, Duress on turn 1. We're going to lose our Careful Study, I'm afraid. But I think we have to let this one go. This isn't worth pitching a Force of Will on. And if they take the Force of Will, then we've got the Careful Study, so we're in good shape. If they take the Careful Study, then we've got Force of Will for whatever their actual play is. Yeah, they took what I would take in that situation, the Careful Study. Let's hope we can draw something sweet here. That's pretty sweet. We're going to play out this Polluted Delta because we don't want to get hit by a random Wasteland or anything. We're not casting spells. A Duress. Sure, like our situation is kind of similar to last time. So have a look. It's pretty good. Like we can Daze this, but then it just means that it paid to get 2 cards, so their Duress becomes a him. If they're taking 1 card here, they can't really damage what our hand's trying to do. They might take the Daze here, but if they're not doing anything with the rest of their turn, if we draw a blue card next turn, it changes the dynamic of our hand quite a bit. Well, like we'd like to keep the Atraxa in our hand until we can pitch it to a discard spell rather than a Force of Will. Alright, so our opponent has discarded our Daze. Sure. Another Duress. Sure. So our opponent has cast 3 Duresses. Bit awkward for us. Okay, this time we'll play out our land. We have a Force of Will. I can't imagine our opponent's got more Duresses. Now, they might have a Thoughtseize there. Mix it up a bit for a change. Pithing Needle. I'll have an Underground Sea here. We've already got one, so we may as well get a second. So this can name Griselbrand, or it can name Polluted Delta. Unlikely to name Marsh Flats. Griselbrand, sure. We're not really a Griselbrand deck. We're an Atraxa deck, because it's just better than Griselbrand. This is one of the reasons why. We can grief our opponent, and they've only got 2 cards in hand. But that would cost us our ability to Force of Will. I think I'd rather just keep the Force of Will up this turn, and if we draw a land next turn, we can just hard cast a grief. It's not very exciting, but I think it's good enough. I suspect this turn is just going to be spent using their Ezra Saga. Wasteland's a bit annoying. Means we can't do the hard cast and the grief next turn. We drew a black card though. We will exile the Griselbrand that doesn't do very much now. And we will grief our opponent. A Turak. Okay, so they're like a rock deck, I guess. So not looking forward to Turak hitting us necessarily. But it does put our Atraxa in the graveyard for us. So they're probably not gonna weren't gonna cast that Turak anyway. They're just going to go in on these as Saga tokens, I imagine. Alright, so there's the bio we know about. So the Nile Spell Bomb is a little bit annoying for us. Going to have to work through that one. We'll play this out in case of discard. If it's like random discard, it's more likely to hit our Atraxa that way, and we get to keep our mana. I think we're just going to get pounded on for a few turns and then die at this rate, because we can't really beat the Nile Spell Bomb unless we try and reanimate the grief and see if they stop that, and then we can maybe try and get the Atraxa in. But we kind of have to do everything on our next turn. No, we got nothing. Losing game 1 with Reanimator feels really bad. Oakley dokley. So, our opponent is going to be hitting our graveyard like that, are they? I have to imagine there's some amount of ley lines going on in their mostly black deck. So I reckon we want these show and tells. They're probably going to be some sort of helmy type stuff. So maybe these are things that we're interested in. I think we definitely want show and tells, which means we're probably cutting some of our reanimation. And we can still reanimate our opponent's things. And if our opponent is on Helm combo, I'd like to at least be able to interact with that with the Thoughtseize. How useful do you think this Daze is going to be? I don't think this Daze is going to be great versus what they're bringing. We'll probably do that, and Reanimate can get stuff out of our opponent's graveyard. Maybe it's the Entomb here that goes, because of Careful Study can power us into the right things. How do I feel about this? Shriekmaw, obviously unplayable in this matchup. Sylex, is that going to be doing anything? It does blow up all the as Saga tokens if that's a game we get into. So let's try this out. Got to play the new cards, right? I have to imagine our opponent is like an Ancient Tomb Dark Ritual deck. Just sort of the Helm deck. I saw a build recently that was sort of the mono black Helm list splashing green for sideboard cards. So that could be what we're looking at here, because everything else looked like the sort of stuff I'd expect to see from one of those Helm decks. Alright, what does our hand do here? Doesn't seem great to me, to be honest. I think we can do better than this. If we had like a cantrip or something, but we're kind of just stuck on this one land here, and we're trying to cast a 3-mana spell. Okay, this is a little bit better, aside from the fact we don't have any lands. So I think if we had like a Brainstorm, I'd be inclined to keep this one, but I don't think we can keep this one. Right, so we have to mulligan this one as well. This can give us a turn 2 guy, so I think we can keep this. Got bottom 2 cards, so maybe it has to be the Petal here. Okay, our opponent didn't do anything here, so we can Thoughtseize ourselves here. I think I'm just going to pass the turn and see what happens next turn. Like, we are vulnerable to a bunch of things here. Duresses, wastelands, all sorts. Alright, our opponent's going for the mono duress route, so we're going to lose our Dance of the Dead this turn. So this is one of the reasons why I didn't want to, because if we Thoughtseize ourselves and then Dance of the Dead, then we've shut ourselves off from one of our important lines here. So now we can Brainstorm. We have a Dance of the Dead for next turn, so I would very much like to have that. Which means we're probably going to struggle to Thoughtseize. We kind of need to do all of our things. This is tough. Maybe we're putting back the Dance of the Dead and the Thoughtseize and just trying to Brainstorm our way out of this. We can Brainstorm at instant speed if we need to save cards from our hand, or if we need to... We've got a blue card for Force of Will, so we may as well keep it. I got a feeling our graveyard is not safe. So I'm rather heading towards... Okay, so we have Thoughtseize here. Let's crack this. We're going to cast this and see what we can do. Interesting. I don't really like many of these things that we've got as options here. So they're going to Thoughtseize away our Lotus Petal here. There's not really much we can do about that. If they hit the Archon of Cruelty, they have Graveyard Reanimate. Okay, yeah, so they have a Bajuka Bog. Sure, this is going to be a tough one. They didn't even have the ley line. We also know that top cards of our library are bad. So we'll play this Lotus Petal they know about. And next turn we can hardcast a Force of Will. We're probably supposed to play out this Lotus Petal so that we can make sure that we can hardcast a Force of Will next turn. And we don't get hit by a Duress effect or a Liliana or something. Dazi Voidwalk. Okay, that's not too scary. Our plan is hopefully to show and tell. Pithing Needle. This is probably going to name Griselbrand. Could name a fetch land, but I think that's a bit weird. Yep, there's a Griselbrand name. But we have this hardcast Force of Will if our opponent casts a Helm of Obedience this turn. There's a Saga. Sure. So that's more Graveyard Hate. A Dark Confident. I don't think we can have our opponent drawing 2 cards a turn. It almost doubles their clock and gives them way more looks at things that are going to mess us up. So I think we just have to let that go. We're already going to be facing down a load of damage from the Urza Saga. Alright, we've got another Lotus Petal. We should have kept that in hand for Brainstorm actually. But if we play it, we can hardcast a Grief that we draw. Did we board out the Griefs? No, we didn't. Yep, so we can hardcast a Grief. Alright, I didn't make a horrible play there. Like, it might have been better just to have it for the purposes of Brainstorm though. So we take 3 this turn, then our opponent makes a 2-2, that becomes a 3-3, and then a 4-4, and probably a 5-5. So, Entomb, not really very useful for us here. So we probably don't fire off the Entomb to thin our deck, we keep it for the purposes of Brainstorm. We don't have a lot of turns before we get killed here. Sure. Our graveyard is not a thing we get to use. Understood. Yep, so they make it now, so they get to come in for an additional point of damage. So we're dead on our next turn. So we need to draw, like... It has to be Brainstorm into Show and Tell, I think. 5, 10, 15, 16, 17, 18. We're just super dead. Yeah, our deck really did not perform there. I'm seeing a bit of tension as well in terms of having a deck that has to mulligan quite a lot, but also having a deck with these Force of Wills in them. It's kind of a little bit awkward. Feels there's a little bit of tension. Right, so let's go on to another round. Okay, so we can Careful Study on turn 1. We have Daze. We just need another mana source. This seems like a keep. Our opponent is a Yorion deck. That could be Taxes. Or it could be the multicolour deck. Could be Breakfast. Considering that they have played a Tundra, I'm expecting their deck to contain Force of Wills. In case I have Wasteland, I think we just have to get a basic island here. We need another mana source anyway, and all of our other mana sources are black. So I'd rather be able to Careful Study a couple of times. Also, the Careful Study is one of my favourite Magic cards because it's such a simple design, but is really cool. You can do a lot with it. It's a nice card. Windswept Heath. So that was the Force of Will we were talking about. We have another Careful Study to rebuy next turn. We could have Dazed to protect that Careful Study. I don't think it's worth doing. Abundant Growth, sure. I would rather Daze to protect our next one, sort of thing, because we kind of had a free roll with this one, although we can't now Daze because they have the amount to pay. But we are still incentivized to Careful Study here. Okay, so we can get rid of a couple of big creatures, but we do need another black source. I've been hitting a recurring problem with this deck of not having enough mana at times and having not enough business at other times, I guess. So maybe that evens it out. But we have Force of Will to protect when we eventually go for it, or a Daze, depending on what's better. We might end up with multiple forces. Maybe we were supposed to keep hold of the Atraxa for a blue card, but I think having Atraxa as the thing you reanimate is just so much more powerful than the Archon, most of the time anyway. A Brainstorm. Life from Malone, getting back a Windswept Heath. This means our opponent definitely has Wastelands in their deck. I don't think you play Life from Malone without them. How many they have remains to be seen though. They might be quite light on them. A Grief. We can cast a Grief. We're going to be discarding end of turn anyway. So I think we just get rid of one of these Entombs. Let's see what our opponent's working with. Force of Negation. Swords to Plowshares. Ice Fang. How do I feel about any of these? We can get rid of one. We can get around one Force of Negation relatively easy. I think we'll take the Plow. We will need to draw a land at some point soon. Our opponent's got some redraws in the form of Ice Fang and Uro. So there goes the Uro. If they hit a land, we can put that in as well. But they didn't play a land for... Okay, so they got mana there. They have one mystery card. And they're going to be casting an Ice Fangs to make it 2 mystery cards. Can we draw a black source? We can draw a black source. Okay, let's cast Dance of the Dead on Atraxa. This is not going to resolve most likely, but that's why we're going to have another bite of the cherry next turn. Force of Negation, pitching Ice Fang. So we've got one card in hand now, so we will force this pitching our Daze. If this doesn't work, we get to do it next turn. So we can untap this guy. So we get a creature. There's only one creature there. There's only one artifact there. We get a land, and we get an instant. Or what instant do we want here? It's probably just the Force of Will in case we find another blue card. Sure. And yeah, I think we just pass the turn. So we can untap our Atraxa next turn. And then we can also deploy a Dance of the Dead. Or probably an Animate Dead on our Archon of Cruelty. It's going to be Minsk and Boo or the Euro. Okay, the Euro is not that scary for us. So, what do we want to do here? I guess step 1 is attack. That gives us a big chunk of life to work with. We'll crack this for our Underground Sea. I think, since we've got the Reanimate, we may as well try on the Archon of Cruelty here. If it doesn't work, we can then try something else next turn. Okay, they've conceded. Sure. Alright, now what is this deck going to have in it? I don't think our opponent is going to be a leyline deck. They're probably going to be running some amount of endurance and or surgical extractions. So show and tell is probably going to be pretty fine here. Thoughtseize is going to be useful to punch holes through. Daze feels like it's going to be bad. Straight up like that. The Flusterstorm and the Brazen Borrower, just sort of nice catch-alls. Do we even want these? Flusterstorm is good protection. Against Pyroblasts and things, our Force of Wills are probably going to be a lot worse, actually. So probably get the Brazen Borrower in and the Flusterstorm. And then we get one more card, so maybe having one Force of Will just to draw 2 is worth it. Or we can have the Shriekmaw, because we know they're going to have a bunch of creatures. And they might have some sort of creature we want to mess with. I just don't think a deck that's going to be running some amount of Pyroblasts is where we want to be trying to 2-for-1 ourselves to force our thing through. And we can just use our discard and have these better permission in terms of Flusterstorm to force through. Could be wrong on that one. But our opponent's going to be better at playing on the stack than we are. I don't like this one. We can make a lot of land drops, but where are we going? I think we can mulligan and get some sort of... Okay. This is more like my sort of jam. Keep this. We have to get rid of one of these cards. It's probably one of our reanimation spells. It's probably the Animate Dead. Because there we go. Turn 1, Thoughtseize. Turn 2, Careful Study, Reanimate. Which is pretty good. Green Sun. So this is going to go get them a Dryad Arbor. And they're starting with only 4 cards left in their hand after that. So this Thoughtseize is hopefully going to be pretty good. Okay, we have a Force of Will. We have an Endurance. They don't have a green card. So if we take the Force of Will, they have to draw a green card. And we can rebuy potentially later on. Now, they might be able to Brainstorm for 1, but they don't have any blue mana. So if they have blue mana... Okay, so there's a buy. Feels okay. They're keeping the mana up, so they're going to be hard casting the Endurance, which is fine. An Archon of Cruelty. So we cast our things. Interesting. I think we'll put... one Archon of Cruelty away and one... no, I kind of want to pitch the Archon of Cruelty to this. Maybe we'll get rid of the... interesting. Get rid of the Marsh Flats here. So then we will cast this, pitching our Archon of Cruelty. Just gets to take their Endurance, so they have to sort of preload the Endurance if they want to put it into play. Okay, they have a Force of Negation as well. Interesting. Okay, we'll take their threat and leave them with the Brainstorm and Force of Negation. Pair Underground Sea. Our Reanimate is probably not resolving here. We're just going to shut our opponent off with a Brainstorm, but they don't have blue mana right now. Would I like to 2-for-1 my opponent? I think this is worth doing. So we'll get both of our opponent's cards from this, I would imagine. If not, we just take the Brainstorm and then they're sort of stuck without blue mana. Yeah, okay, so we got 2 of their cards that way. Now we're looking for mana and show and tell or careful study into some other stuff. We've got options. Okay, our opponent just straight up drew the Endurance. That's cool. More mana back in our deck, which is kind of one of the things we want here. I don't want to fire off this Thoughtseize yet. Although it makes our 2 mana reanimation spells worse if I don't now. We've got 6 of those. We're quite a ways away from show and telling. We could wait for more information. I think we wait for more information. That's close though. I think that's close in terms of what you're supposed to do there. Although if I Thoughtseize, so we're going to draw the 2 mana thing. What like Dance to the Dead or Animate Dead. Because we didn't Thoughtseize ourselves. If we had Thoughtseize ourselves, then we probably would immediately draw show and tell. Because that's how the game works sometimes. A Brainstorm. Okay, this is a good place to start. Let's see what we're working with. A Careful Study. I like that. Another Brainstorm. I like that too. But we don't get to keep all of these, do we? So we put the Thoughtseize And it might just be the Brainstorm here. So we'll crack this. Maybe we're supposed to wait a turn and draw that Brainstorm. Maybe that's a better play there. So we cast this and we're left with one card in hand. Oh, God. Yeah. I'm not happy with how I've played that one. Yikes. Oh well, we kind of covered from multiple angles. Any reanimation spell is good. Any fatty is good. So we've got stuff going on, but just, yeah. If we had waited to get another card, purely so that we can Careful Study into show and tell and something. Maybe we could have kept that Brainstorm, fixed the hand a bit more. Maybe I was playing quicker than I needed to in terms of trying to get this game in the bag. Yeah, a bit awkward. Interesting they're not fighting with the Dried Arbor there. Okay, so we have this Lotus Petal we can't do anything with. We keep it in our hand for purposes of Brainstorm and Careful Studies. Right. Drawing an Atraxa would be real nice about now. I'd take a Griselbrand or an Archon, but an Atraxa would be real nice. An Animate Dead. Is this going to resolve on our Atraxa? I don't think so. If it does though, we're good. Oh wow. Okay, so we're probably winning this game now. An Ice Fang. I think you want to cast that first in case you find a counterspell, but that might mean they don't have another blue card in hand. Okay, so we get a creature. We can get this Grief, which we can then pitch a black card to. So we can pitch this Animate Dead to Grief our opponent's hand immediately. Then we get a land, we get a Brainstorm, and we get a Sorcery, which is probably going to be a Careful Study. Seems pretty good. I think cast a Careful Study first here. Maybe we'll find something better to pitch to a Grief. Right, so plow our Atraxa, we can rebuy it pretty soon. This is a nice thing to put in. We don't really need this Lotus Petal right now, and we're not really in the mood for an Entomb. Oh no, the Entomb's going to be to the... Yeah, so we'll pitch the mana sources here. Because we're going to cast this, exiling this, just to see what our opponent's working with. Omnath, Pyroblast. Alright, these aren't that exciting to me. If we take the Pyroblast, it does kind of say what we've got going on here. We could always hit the Yorion. That seems fine as well. Sure, we'll hit the Yorion and leave them with Pyroblast and Omnath. If they play out the Omnath, they won't have the red to... If they find a red source, they can cast. So these are uncastable spells. That's why we took the other one. But if they find a red source, they have a choice between which of these they cast. This is a blue card for Force of Will, and if we show and tell, they can put in the Omnath. Now, obviously, Griselbrand is better than Omnath, but we don't necessarily need to look at that. This does not have Death Touch right now, which is good for us. So I think we just send in our Clown. If they have a second Ice Fang, it's still not Death Touch, right? They need to have 4 permanents total. Just Brainstorm here. Okay, I don't think we need these two. Play our land out, and then we can decide if we need to do anything with it next turn. If we want the Entomb for some reason, we can always fish it out next turn. If they find a red source, they can Pyroblast our Atraxa, but then we get to bring it back again. An Uro. That's fine. A Wasteland. That's fine too. So we can also Animate Dead the Yorion in our opponent's graveyard. Do we want an... I don't think we want that Entomb, so we're going to crack this now. Let me go and see. Maybe we're supposed to get an island there? No. If we get an island there, then all of our fetch lands can get something, but now I guess all our fetch lands can get the island as well, actually, apart from Marsh Flats. So if we attack here, why not do this for the memes? Alright. Black. Black. We don't really care too much if this resolves or not, because we've got such a wealth of other stuff going on. This lets us flicker our Atraxa. Force of Will, get rid of that Omnath. So now we know they've just got Pyroblast in hand. And we're obviously miles ahead on board, and we're miles ahead in our hand as well. An Ice Fang. So these still won't have Death Touch. But if our guy dies, we get it back with an Animate Dead and draw a whole bunch more cards. Okay, so this can make them Death Touch. And we know the one card in their hand is a Pyroblast. So this is fine. Now, we probably could have played this game in a way where it would be over by now. To be honest, I'm just being somewhat cautious. Let's Atraxa. Okay, they didn't want to get the Pyroblast going. Interesting. So we can blink. I think if we want to, if we just take this Pyroblast out of their hand, they might cast it in response, then we get our Atraxa back. If they don't, then we blink it with their Yorion. So we've kind of got them coming and going here. Like, we obviously still got the spare Griselbrand. Yep. So they went for this instead of the Death Touch on it. Either way, it's going to work out kind of the same for them. So, yep. So there's the Pyroblast. I thought these would just do 2 damage to us. Then we get to animate Atraxa again. Draw a whole bunch of cards again. There is 1 creature in here. There is 1 sorcery. We'll take the island, I think. Or do we want the Brainstorm and a fetch land? Like a fetch land and a Brainstorm. So the other sorcery is the Reanimate, but I don't think we're in the mood for Reanimate right now. And we can take an enchantment. So we just completely filled our grip here. Put our land, so we have to go to discard. And we're done. Our opponent is very much out of this game. It's just a case of getting to the stage where that is actually the case. Sure, we don't really care about this. Opponent's got 2 cards in hand now, though, which could be important. A Grief. I think we will just Thoughtseize our opponent first. Vince Gamboo can definitely go away. And crack this for the island that's still in our deck. Cast a Show and Tell. Put in our Archon of Cruelty, I think. Okay, we're going to Grief the other card out of the hand in case I had any scary Green Sun Zenith targets. But we played that game kind of slower in case our opponent like had Pyroblast or removal, could like sweep our guy out of the way and then start attacking. I didn't want to just put a load of stuff in play. Maybe they had sudden Supreme Verdict in their deck. I didn't really want to push my luck too much because we were so far ahead. But anyway, let's talk about the deck. So first things first, Atraxa is the real deal. I think this is the new best target to reanimate or cheat into play or whatever, to be honest. It feels much better than having to pay a bunch of life to draw cards. You just get the cards. And being able to attack and block. All the things I said at the start are true, and I think this is very strong. If battle cards, when they eventually come out, are really strong, then that'd be nice too, because you can find some of those if they're useful. But I think Atraxa is very much the real deal. Now, for the rest of the deck, like obviously, I think the enchantment package to get that girl Atraxa makes a lot of sense, because obviously having enchantments to find is great. Same with Lotus Petals. This all makes sense to me. That seems fine. Now, the other choice in this deck is the fact that we're running blue. So obviously we mentioned that Careful Study is slightly worse than Faithless Looting, because Faithless Looting is the same card with additional lines of text. Force of Will and Daze and Brainstorm are why we're playing blue here. So Force of Will makes the matchups where they go under you, so like Storm decks and things like that, where they can just get something underneath you and sort of clap you pretty hard. Or it can sometimes interact with Graveyard Hate, like obviously it can interact with Endurance, but it can also interact with things like Grafdigger's Cage. But nobody's really playing Grafdigger's Cage right now. The most you'll ever see at the moment is 1. Sometimes as a Saga target, sometimes just as a one-off in Delver for them to find. I think the times where Force of Will is going to be good are... I think you could probably just play a red-black Reanimator with Force of Will, with specific sideboard cards, and you're going to end up in a better spot. We don't have any... we don't have like the hugest amount of basics in our deck necessarily, but that's fine. I think we could dip into other colours if we wanted to here. Now, regular red-black Reanimator has Serenity as an option, which feels better than our options here, to be honest. Playing things like the Filigree Sylex and stuff like that. Serenity is just an absolute hammer for some decks, and it's just a good way of getting rid of all the scary things rather than trying to like bounce it with a borrow or whatever, and you can just jam form them in your sideboard and be pretty content that they're going to work. So I'm not really sure that playing blue gives you enough. Now, don't get me wrong, Brainstorm is a hell of a magic card. But one thing I was finding in this deck that was causing me issues was the mana base needed. I needed to draw more things. You know, I needed to draw more mana quite often. And sort of developing a sort of longer Brainstorm game, that's not what it's there for necessarily. It's kind of there for you have that one turn to fix your hand and then you go. So I think the Brainstorm is pretty valuable, but I don't know if it's trapping people into thinking that they should be playing Dazes and Force of Wills. Honestly, I think if you were just playing this list and then swap these out for the usual stuff you have in Red-Black Reanimator, so, you know, more Griefs and Disruption, I think that just looks better to me. And then we can have the white sources in our deck and have some Serenities in the sideboard. I just don't think this deck needs Force of Will that much, to be honest with you. I think the decks, like Red-Black Reanimator is pretty good. I don't think Force of Will is giving you enough percentage points versus the decks where you want the Force of Wills compared to the amount of percentage points you're losing by the fact that you have these cards which sometimes won't do anything in your deck. Because this deck mulligans a lot. And a lot of the time, you don't really want to be pitching your Atraxas or your Careful Studies or whatever, or even your Brainstorm sometimes. They're kind of just essential for sort of like developing your plan and getting things going. So Force of Will is just a desperation move against decks where they kill you, like Oops All Spells, for example, where you have to interact with them before they kill you. Now Storm is a bit like that as well. However, decks like Storm are designed to beat counter spells as a general rule. So I'm still not sure how good that's going to be. Now, it's definitely going to improve your Oops All Spells matchup, no doubt about it. But I don't think it's where I would personally want to be. I think I'd just play a Reanimator deck with more cards that are 1-for-1s instead of 2-for-1ing ourselves. So have our Disruption, you know, Thoughtseizes and Griefs and things. I think I'd rather have that. Also, because all of our reanimation spells hit either graveyard, we really want to be maxing out on Thoughtseizes here. Because if we have more Thoughtseizes, then all of a sudden we can play off our opponent's graveyard. And yeah, sometimes a Seasoned Dungeoneer isn't as exciting as an Atraxa, but a turn 1 Seasoned Dungeoneer will win you a lot of games, and that'll be enough. Or if you're playing a Mirror, you know, take their Atraxa or whatever their big creature of choice is. So I think this deck is actually a little bit of a trap with playing the blue spells. If I was going to play this, I would definitely think about cutting these. But I do like the Brainstorm. So I think you can keep the Brainstorm and the Careful Study. You're taking a slight downgrade on Faithless Looting in order to get yourselves a Brainstorm. And as we've seen, like there's loads of decks like Storm that happily run Brainstorm. I think people just sometimes assume that they're supposed to be running all these sweet blue spells with their deck. Like you could keep the Dazes if you wanted and just swap these Force of Wills for 4 more Thoughtseize. So 2 more Thoughtseize, 2 more Grief. I think if you do that, I like this deck list more. I will say that the mana base felt less good. So regular Reanimated decks have a bunch of Dark Rituals in to power stuff out. We don't have access to that. That's kind of what this Daze slot is. We're basically playing Daze instead of Dark Ritual. And I'm not really sure it's better. So like Daze isn't going to help if you're on the draw anyway, a lot of the time against people. Especially for like the decks that go underneath you. It's not going to do what you need it to do. It can protect you on your combo turn, but if you had a Dark Ritual and you cast your Dark Ritual, you're probably going to be able to fire off some sort of removal spell. And if you've got more black cards, it makes your Griefs better. I just think Grief is good. Grief is good. Who'd have thought I'd come to such a conclusion? So that's my take on this deck. Like, it's obviously very powerful. One of our losses was to the Mirror, and we did sort of get jammed up by the deck that slowly beat us down with the Sagas, the Mono Black deck. Mono Black decks, notoriously difficult for Reanimated decks because they usually have 8 main deck things that just nullify your graveyard, so they get game 1s against you far more often than a lot of other decks do. Now, obviously, Show and Tell is a really good card to change that around, but I don't think that's where we necessarily want to be. Now, what you could also do with this deck, if you wanted, actually, is you could run some Show and Tells in the main deck, because if we're playing a bunch more discard, we'll then have the ability to check that the coast is clear, as well as get rid of any scary things, and then we can Show and Tell our own thing. So what you could do is split this between like 2 or 3 Show and Tells, and then make the rest lands, because I think you want more lands if you're playing Show and Tell. So that's another thought as well. Yeah, I think I've discussed this one quite enough. I hope you enjoyed seeing Atraxa get to work. Very powerful Magic the Gathering card. If they want to Caracas it, doesn't really hurt you too much. I think this might help make sneak and show a better deck, because if you sneak this into play, it's probably going to find the next one to go again, whereas Griselbrand doesn't always do that and can be Pithing Needled. Now, obviously, they can Pithing Needle your sneak attack, don't get me wrong. But also, if your Atraxa's getting bounced, that's also not the end of the world, because, again, it's blue, pitches to Force of Will. So I expect to see lots of people cheating this in. Obviously, Natural Order was something I mentioned when I did my cards to watch out for in the new set thing. Yeah, pretty happy with that. I don't like the sideboard too much in this deck either. I think it's fine for what it is, but I just think the deck could be improved by going away from one of the things it's leaning on here. Alright, I've rambled far too long on this one, so I'm going to say goodbye to you now. But first, one last plug for the road. Like, comment, subscribe. These things cost you nothing and they really help me out, especially subscribers. That's what I'm really trying to get at the moment. Okay, thank you very much for watching and goodbye.